It's a great honor for me to be invited to this forum, and I deeply regret not to have been able to come to Port Harcourt for this event. I really want to thank the organization for this invitation. Especially I would like to thank Mrs. Coco Canango, who invited me kindly to come to Port Harcourt. And I would like to express also my thanks and my admiration towards Mr. Wole Soyinka. I've always admired and read his works, and especially a book that I read lately called AK, because it tells a story of a young boy living in Nigeria, and in many aspects I find some reminiscence of my own life in Nigeria when I was 8 years old. And so my regrets not to be with you, and hoping to be able in the many aspects I find some reminiscence of my celebration of literature. When I was 8 years old or so, with my mother and my brother, I went to join my father, who was a British medical officer in Nigeria, in a very remote place called Ogoja, in the Cross River district, and in this small village, playing with the children and getting to know the nature, and to know also the people of Nigeria. And my way to Nigeria has been a strong memory too, also because this was a very long travel. When I took a boat, and this probably lasts more than 1 month, going from harbour to harbour in the different British possessions in West Africa, and the travel was very boring. So on the boat I began to write, and I wrote my 2 first novels there. One called, appropriately enough, A Long Voyage, in the different British possessions in West Africa. And the travel was very boring, so going home after a long absence. I believe those 2 books had their origin in the anguish that I felt by the idea of never seeing again my grandmother, never seeing again my homeland of France, and also the idea to getting to know a man who said he felt by the idea of never seeing again. The first stop on the African coast, there come on board a crowd of Africans, men, women and children, who had to earn their passage to the next port by working. Each one received a little steel hammer, with which they had to clean the rust of the hull and the framework of the ship. These people used to work on the deck through sun, wind and rain, without shelter, knocking throughout the day on the hull with their little hammers. The rhythmic noise of the hammer blows still obsesses me today. I can't forget it. There was something sad and exhausting merging into the vibration of the ship's engine. I still seem to see those men and women crouched on the deck, skin shining with sweat. I still seem to hear the chant which accompanied their servile labor. Like the wartime years, this memory opened my eyes very quickly to reality, to the scenes which I then witnessed in Nigeria and which used to form the everyday condition of colonial life. I remember men chained up on the roads to Abakaliki, marching in cadenced footsteps as they were going to work digging the private swimming pool of the district officer. I remember also another district officer in the region of Obudu, close to the Cameroon border, who used to display in his drawing room the skulls of all the gorillas he had killed in the surrounding hills. My father used to show a certain disdain towards those representatives of the British authority, and it is probably this attitude that has inspired the mistrust that I feel when I hear any talk of the civilizing mission of Europeans in Africa. Several years later, when I was 16 or 17 years old, on the ferry crossing the Channel to England, I re-encountered the same Africans, Wolof, Mandinga, Yoruba, Igbo, in search of a better life. They traveled on the deck of the boat, dressed in traditional costume, the long blue shirts of the Hausa that my father liked so much to wear. And they were unable to speak English, their scared-faced were expressing both anguish and defiance. Speaking of culture today, speaking of literature, how can we use it? Can we retain confidence in it? This long preamble has two objectives. First, I would like to oppose culture to violence and to war. The state of war, the states of war, since we know at present that between the ideal of peace, attained with difficulty in Europe and Japan, and the state of war to the death, there are many intermediary stages: colonization, tribal wars, economical imperialism, religious or ideological radicalism. Those states of war are absolutely incompatible with the message of culture. The evidence for this is rather recent. Not so long ago, in Asia and North America, the conviction of a hierarchy of cultures. Certain cultures were more valuable than others, and from this fact would have the right and even the duty to substitute themselves for others, to destroy them and make them embrace their religion and their language. 16th century Spain invaded and destroyed the great American and Indian empires in Mexico and in Peru, and also in Haiti and the Caribbean, less through the millenarian illusion of converting the natives to the true faith than through the need to eradicate the identity of these people in order to enslave them. The consequences of monocultural radicalism are now understood. It was on this foundation that the great colonial conquests of the 19th century were based. War was then the vehicle of belief in a single culture, carried out in the name of civilization and of finality of history. It must be emphasized that such a conviction does not belong to a complete past. Recently, the dubious theories elaborated by North Americans such as Samuel Huntington or David Rappaport, and nurtured by the intellectuals of the Institute of War and Peace at Columbia University in New York, have served as the basis for foreign policy in Washington from John F. Kennedy through George W. Bush. My second point is the conviction that I have inherited from my Mauritian ancestors and my African childhood. If war is the absolute enemy of culture and law, there exists, however, another danger very present today in our modern world. It expresses itself in the fear we feel when confronted with globalization. That is to say, faced with the perspective of a universal culture based on the facility and rapidity of business and information exchange. The end of the era of imperial capitals dominating colonies in Europe, Asia, or in the Americas coincides with the development of nationalism and communalism. Culture, which means the arts, literature, and even less affirmative expressions such as cooking or fashion, and lifestyle, the way of life, have become at the same time indicators of uniformity and signs of individual identity. In the West, great principles are proclaimed non-negotiable. For example, democracy, the republic, or even secularity. And it is forgotten that these principles have coexisted with the slave trade and the racial segregation. The cultural politics of the inheritors of colonialism and the slave trade hardly contradict such totalitarian customs. In France, there are anxieties about the invasion of the English language and the dangers which menace national identity, but at the same moment, national scholastic programs aim to suppress regional languages, regarded as useless, and individuals from immigrant backgrounds are underrepresented in both political and cultural life, and invited to integrate themselves, whether voluntarily or by force, except for their dwelling places, which have become new ghettos, havens for unemployment and delinquency. If, in the fashion of sociologist Amartya Sen, one establishes a ranking of nations in the present world, no longer according to their economic or military power, but according to their commitment to the intercultural ideal, one sees on the first level countries such as Bolivia or Ecuador or Peru, who have included such practices in their internal politics, teaching of languages, valorization of native cultures. Some African countries such as Ghana, Senegal or Nigeria, and some European countries such as Sweden or Norway. And since I belong to this small nation, Mauritius, where everyone speaks at least every day 3 languages, French, English and Creole, fluently, and where there is remarkably peaceful coexistence between communities. In contrast, on the bottom of this ranking would be the ancient colonial powers, often incapable of either responsibility or self-critique in the relations which they establish with the rest of the world. The challenge facing our times today lies in this dual anxiety on which the survival of future generations ultimately depends: the end of armed conflicts and the banning of the sale of arms, and on the other hand, the peaceful revolution of an intercultural ideal. Can we keep trust in the future? Since we are speaking about literature, it seems to me that we can believe in the future. What other justification could there be for those beautiful and familiar objects called books? Art, Oscar Wilde commented in his preface to Dorian Gray, does not know how to act on morals or on laws, still less how to prevent wars. But art is perfectly useless, he says, unless it creates beauty and gives flavor to life. Globalization, like good and evil, is nothing by itself. As Hamlet used to say, thinking makes it so. Literature, and particularly this marvelous hybrid which is the novel, a mixture of poetry, of confession, and of voyeuristic cynicism, is indeed the place of cross-fertilization. It is an art which is absolutely opposed to every loss of identity and to all projects of a universal cultural ectoplasm. Every author, every reader is a human being, at the same time close and different, and only art can give us hope that this difficult contradiction may one day be resolved. Thank you.